On Thursday, I Googled a very particular phrase, a particular question. I even had to put the quotation marks around it. It is quite a particular question. It's unique, and I don't reckon any one of you has asked this question. In fact, the Google result came back and told me that no one has answered this particular question. Now, before I get to the question, I'm going to tell a little bit of the story that led to the question, because it was a question that my family, when I was in year 9 or year 10, had to answer ourselves. It's not hard to answer, but it was the one that we just needed to figure out ourselves. So I'll tell a bit of the story. My brother wanted to brew to make his own ginger beer. Not alcoholic, but ginger beer. Dad liked it, my brother likes it, I like it, so why not? We'd drink it, it'd get drunk. So he looked up a recipe and he got about making it. He did whatever he needed to do, and he made it. He made a decent batch of it. I think it was about like 12 glass jars of the stuff, and put them in a box and did what the recipe told him to do, and you meant to store it for a decent length of time. I can't quite remember how long. It was a while ago. All I know is that it was long enough to be annoying, when you want something then, and then you find out it's got to sit and wait for however long that's an annoying length of time, like a week at least, maybe even a month. It was a decent length of time. Now, Bundaberg, I looked up, Bundaberg brew their ginger beer over 3 days, is what they say. Now, they do it in vats, and it's in a concentrated form, so it takes them over 3 days, which for them probably is 3 days and 1 hour. That's definitely how marketing works. It sounds really good, but really it's probably 3 days plus a little bit. But this is homebrew, and we didn't have that pressure, and it wasn't concentrated, and so it took a little bit longer. Anyway, he makes this ginger beer, he puts it in its glass jars, he puts it in a box in the garage so that they could just do their thing in peace. So the question, some of you might have already figured out a little bit about what the theme might be or what the question might even be. The question was how to clean ginger beer off the roof. That was a question I Googled. That was a thing we needed to figure out when I was in year 9 or 10, because it turns out even when you brew something that isn't alcoholic, there is a pressure build-up. Now, obviously, Bundaberg use great big massive metal vats, and that handles it. But the recipe, the thing that my brother followed, actually said to use glass jars. Now, I assume it didn't say anything about wannabe brewers, to the wannabe brewers about what might happen in those glass jars. My brother might not have paid attention to it, but I assume it didn't say anything. But the pressure built up. Unfortunately, the glass jars and them shattering and the lids popping off didn't make enough sound for us to hear it happening. We walked out into the garage and found this brown sticky liquid splattered all over the place. Quite a bit of it on the roof, and a ton of the jars broken. There were some that we managed to rectify, and at the end of the day, the taste wasn't really worth the wait. But we still had this mess to clean up. What happened was that my brother put something that increased in pressure inside something that was brittle and quite rigid. And so when the pressure got too much, the glass just gave way, or the lids just gave way. They were rigid and couldn't flex and move that they needed to be able to. Let me read the couple of verses I'm going to focus on for our Devo. So it's Mark chapter 2, and I'm going to be reading from 18 to 22. Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. Some people came and asked Jesus, "How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?" Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and on that day they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, he pours new wine into new wineskins." What Jesus is saying here is the old isn't being patched up. The old isn't able to contain the new. Jesus is saying that he isn't here to patch a small hole in a relatively okay system, old but okay. The old shrunken cloak has done its moving, and the old wineskin has done its moving. And the wineskin particularly is just as brittle as a glass jar would be. In fact, Jesus is trying to say for us to not try to make him patch up a hole. That's not what he's here for. Our old systems and our old ways, the tear is going to be worse if we try to just patch them up with the new Jesus. If we try to fit Jesus into our old brittle wineskins, then the wineskins will just burst. What this is about is these people have come and they've asked Jesus why he and his disciples aren't conforming to the old ways. Why are they not conforming to a pattern that had been set out for them by other people? We all know that clothes shrink. We don't just get bigger. Clothes do shrink. T-shirts that I've bought as an adult when all my height growing has been done, that used to kind of come down here and were long enough to kind of cover my shorts a little bit, are now at the stage where they're getting up around the shoulders and look a bit more like a tank top. They just do shrink. We know that. If there's a tear, if I tear one of those shirts and Rach decides that she'll try to fix it for me because old shirts are comfortable and sews a new patch on that tear, well, over time, that tear is also going to shrink and we'll pull away from the tear. We understand how that would work. What we should be thinking when we read these couple of verses, how we should be reacting is we should be reflecting on how we see Jesus. Do we try to make Jesus conform to our way, our old ideas, our expectations? Do we look at Jesus and he'll be good? We think he'll be good at just patching up that little bit of a hole. We've got a little bit of a hole in what we're doing, and so Jesus will just kind of be the little bit of the patch. Or do we look at Jesus and we think, actually, it need a little bit of a top up, feel a bit empty inside, so I'll top myself up with Jesus. Because what we should be doing is making our lives conform to Jesus. Instead of trying to wear our old clothing and just patch up a few of the holes with Jesus, we should be taking on new clothing. In Ephesians 4:22-24 says this: "You were taught with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitudes of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness." So Paul says it's not patching, it's taking off, thinking of clothing, taking off the old way of life and putting on new way of life. What Jesus is doing is new. What Jesus does is new. It's not the way it was. It's not the way it is. It's a new thing conformed to Jesus' lives that are being conformed to this new thing that he is doing. And that is the disclaimer that it's what Jesus is doing. Just as new wineskins will shape and move and transform in regard to whatever the wine is doing inside them, that's how it works. It's dictated by the wine. They're malleable and soft, and they'll stretch and grow. Old wineskins have nowhere to go. An old wineskin would be firm and brittle, and it's done its stretching. There's no more it can move. So you fill it up with new wine, and when it needs to stretch, it'll just burst. It doesn't allow the room that is needed. Our lives are to be like new wineskins, soft and subtle and able to be moved, able to grow, able to stretch according to what Jesus wants them to do. We should look for him to be doing new things in our lives, not taking us back to the old. It's not conforming to the old way of things. It's not taking us back to the old way of things. It's doing new things. Jesus should be doing new things in our life, and we should be looking out for that. Our rigid plans and ideas must conform to what Jesus' plan and idea for our life is. Mark's gospel quite intently pushes us to think about discipleship. It's what Mark's gospel does. It makes us think about discipleship. The question is, are we going to think about discipleship intently? Are we going to think about what that entails? Being a disciple is following after and changing the way you live for the one you're following. Are we going to be disciples of Jesus and follow him and change our ways to what he's doing? Are we going to be instead like old wineskins in the jars full of ginger beer, brittle and hard and unchanging and eventually pop? Or are we going to be malleable and movable by Jesus, conformed to his ways?